Good morning, everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Maeve Duggan, and I am the Chief Operating Officer and Acting CEO of MassINC. We are delighted to welcome you this morning to our 10th Annual Gateway Cities Innovation Institute Awards and Summit. Before we begin our official programming, I want to remind you that this event is being recorded and that the recordings and slides will be made available afterward. I'm thrilled to be kicking off today's exciting program. Every year, MassINC presents this event, a combination of celebration and substance to support the work of the Gateway Cities Innovation Institute. This event and the work of the Institute are made possible by our generous sponsors, and I want to thank each of them for their commitment to our Gateway Cities. Special thanks to our Gateway Cities Champion Circle sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, Eastern Bank, and Mass Development. Thank you to our Gateway Cities community partners, Enterprise Bank, the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership, the Massachusetts Association of Community Colleges, State Street, and Trinity Financial. And last but not least, thank you to our Gateway Cities sustainers, Blue Hub Capital, Harbor One Bank, the Massachusetts Growth Capital Corporation, and Pentucket Bank. Your generous support makes today's conversation possible. Thank you. The theme for this year's event is social infrastructure for vibrant communities. Today's program will explore strategies to promote social interaction through the built environment. Social ties and civic connections are paramount to the well-being of a community, as we saw over and over again during the pandemic. But what role does the built environment play enabling such connections? What opportunities do we have to improve our spaces to foster these relationships? And with the infusion of federal recovery money and infrastructure funding, how do we ensure that the streets, buildings, parks, and public spaces all around us enhance our community connections? Today's event will try to answer these questions and promote new ideas for thinking about what makes the neighborhood vibrant and welcoming to all. We want all of you to be a part of the conversation as well. So please share any thoughts or questions in the chat. A quick run through of today's program. We are delighted to honor Lieutenant Governor-elect and Mayor of Salem, Kim Driscoll, with this year's Mayor Carpenter Award for Excellence in Gateway City Leadership. We will then have a presentation from Andre LaRue, MassINC's Gateway Hub's Director, on social infrastructure in gateway cities. That will be followed by our Innovator panel, featuring this year's honorees, Marcos Marrero, Heather McMahon, Adelsa Mendes, Patty Rigo, and Noah Berger. There will also be an opportunity for Q&A, so please have your questions ready. Next, Senator Lesser will be presented with the Gateway City Champion Award, and we will close today's event with a greeting from MassINC's incoming CEO, Joe Kreisberg. But before we get to all of that, I want to turn it over to Ben Foreman, MassINC's Research Director and the Director of the Gateway Cities Innovation Institute. Ben has been instrumental to MassINC's work and partnerships in gateway cities and will introduce a video taking a look back at 10 years of impact. Take it away, Ben.
Good morning and welcome to everyone who's joining us for the first time this year and to those who are returning. If you've been here before, you know how much I look forward to this annual celebration, coming together just before the Thanksgiving break to take a moment to recognize the accomplishments of so many Gateway City leaders and to renew our vows to keep fighting together for the Gateway City's cause has become sort of like a religious holiday for me. I hope this short video we've got for you will surface some more memories of our times together over the past 10 years and inspire everyone to stay with us on this journey.
The founding of the Gateway Cities Innovation Institute. It's the fall of 2012. In Boston, the Great Recession has barely been a blip. But in gateway cities, embers from the foreclosure crisis continue to smolder. Redevelopment projects planned for years by visionary gateway city leaders have been abandoned or dramatically scaled down. But gateway cities aren't deterred. The idea that they have a unique role to play in the Commonwealth's future has been germinating for years. Spurred by a MassINC Brookings Institution report showing how Massachusetts is fueling inequality with policy choices that consistently overlook the needs of regional economic centers beyond Boston. In 2008, Gateway City leaders gathered at Boston's Old State House to sign a compact to respond to this imbalance. Together, they voiced support for community and economic development policies that lead to more equitable growth. With leadership from Representative Antonio Cabral, legislators respond to this call to action by forming a Gateway Cities caucus. Joining forces with mayors and other local officials, the caucus quickly racked up victories, starting with the codifying of Gateway City municipality in law. The movement is picking up steam, though the challenges remain significant. The Boston Globe takes note with a series of editorials, cajoling state leaders to do more. To go bigger and bolder, the movement requires a long-term, disciplined strategy. So in October of 2012, Gateway City leaders returned to Boston, gathering at the State House to launch a new institute at MassINC dedicated to supporting a sustained campaign. In its first year, the Institute initiates two projects that were emblematic of this more vigorous approach. Transformative redevelopment was the first. In January 2013, the Institute brought Gateway City legislators together with Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, Greg Bielecki. Gathering at Beacon Hill's historic Hampshire House, they pitched a downtown revitalization strategy. The plan called for more than $1 billion in state capital to catalyze private investment in targeted areas. With leadership from then Chelsea City Manager Jay Ash, Gateway City leaders lobbied for the proposal on Beacon Hill. Mayors came to the State House to testify jointly before various committees. While the Transformative Development Initiative that Governor Patrick signed into law in 2014 was much smaller than what was envisioned, the scaled-down program offers a strong foundation for larger investments. The Gateway City's education vision was the second major initiative launched during the Institute's first year. Throughout 2013, the Institute convened mayors, school superintendents, and other education leaders to work out an education strategy. MassINC circled the state, from Springfield to New Bedford, meeting with students, business leaders, and education advocates, gathering feedback. Together, Gateway City leaders went to the State House to advocate for funding and smarter accountability structures. With Gateway City students from across the state, the Institute helped Beacon Hill leaders learn about early college, a central pillar of the education vision. From neighborhood stabilization to inclusive entrepreneurship to transformative transit-oriented development, the Institute is refining a formula for collective policy development and advocacy. We co-develop policy blueprints with local leaders, translate them into legislation with members of the caucus, travel the state to spread awareness, and advance the concepts into law and effective program implementation. Municipal leaders in gateway cities have tough jobs. They succeed with vision and keen insight into what works, and they never give up. Many of the most exciting things happening in Massachusetts today are the result of gateway city leaders who roll up their sleeves and problem solve. From tireless economic development professionals like New Bedford's Derek Santos to transformational mayors like Lawrence's Dan Rivera. Each year we gather to honor them and their work. Whether it's inspirational leaders like Brockton's Mary Waldron and Fitchburg's Mark Doan, or collaborative projects such as the 5-District Partnership, Beyond Walls, and Art in the Park. We also recognize leaders who champion gateway cities statewide, such as Governor Deval Patrick and MassINC's own John Schneider. The Gateway City Innovation Institute's Awards and Summit inspires us to look to the future with cautious optimism. Leaders like Arthur Jemison, Governor Baker, Mayor McGee, and Chris Coase have challenged us to keep advocating for our vital regional centers. It is difficult to overstate how important it is to keep up this fight. Decades of unbalanced growth have done grave harm to the social and economic fabric of Massachusetts and the nation. Powered by new leaders who bring more diverse voices and perspective to policy debates, the Gateway Cities movement offers a guiding light.
Both of our next presenter and the first honoree appeared throughout that video in some of the most indelible images. Flipping through the pictures of them in our archives and seeing them lead each in their own way inspired the script writing for that final section on Gateway City leadership. We're so fortunate to have them with us this morning. To present the Mayor Bill Carpenter Award for Excellence in Gateway City Leadership, I welcome back a previous recipient, Dan Rivera, President and CEO of Mass Development and a former mayor of the great Gateway City of Lawrence.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Maeve and Ben. I'm so excited to be here and to present this award. It is my honor to present to you all the 2022 Mayor Bill Carpenter Award for Excellence in Gateway City Leadership. See, the loss of Mayor Bill Carpenter in 2019 was a shock to us all, and Bill was a tireless champion of his beloved Brockton, the city of champions. His unrelenting and infectious approach to governing had created an unprecedented momentum and an urban renewal in the city's downtown, and a real sense of optimism that buoyed the city and its residents. The mayor's signature laugh and great smile will be remembered by Brocktonians for generations to come. So it is fitting that when MassINC looked to give an award for excellence in Gateway City leadership, they would name it after Bill. Now, you only have to be with Mayor and Lieutenant Governor-elect Kim Driscoll a short time, either in community, celebrating an achievement of something small or large, or in a crisis, trying to find your way out of it and plotting the best course, to know that she has these very same characteristics. I remember meeting Mayor Driscoll, who was a child of an immigrant mother, like myself, when I became mayor, and she was unselfish with her time and her advice, a real mentor to me. By that time, Kim had been doing the job in her beloved Salem almost a decade, whether in her efforts to get a new MBTA train station, a new state court complex, or a new ferry and waterfront port at Salem Wharf, or now as Salem has become a national leader in the offshore wind sector. Mayor Driscoll has always been a member of what she has coined the GSD wing of municipal leadership, the Get Stuff Done wing. I watched her lead with Republican Governor Charlie Baker on expanding housing in Salem, but what they were really doing was laying the groundwork for all communities battling the housing crisis across the Commonwealth. And I also witnessed her tough leadership as we fought for our communities through the COVID pandemic. Kim brought to her neighbors and to the job of mayor her training as a planner and lawyer, totally equipped with leadership forged and teamwork on the basketball court as a star athlete at Salem State University, and her early days as a community development worker in Beverly and Salem. What also forged her leadership was later in her life, her role as Chelsea's chief legal counsel and as deputy city manager, along with her time on the Salem City Council. With a mayor's grand laugh and a mayor's great smile, and a mayor's can-do attitude, and of course, a big heart, Mayor Driscoll will leave a legacy of impact in the lives of Salem residents that we that have served as mayors can only wish to have accomplished in our own communities. Being a Gateway City mayor is real hard work, and Mayor Kim Driscoll has led with excellence and been a shining example for all Gateway City mayors to come. So congratulations on the award and on your recent victories. It was an honor to have served with you in the cadre of Massachusetts mayors. To all those present, I present to you 2022 Mayor Bill Carpenter Award for Excellence in Gateway City Leadership, Mayor and Lieutenant Governor-elect Kim Driscoll.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's great to be here with all of you virtually. Really feel like this is very special for me because I knew Mayor Carpenter, just had the good fortune to serve with him. And like so many officials who are on this Zoom call, and those of you who work in gateway cities, we're really champions for the places we live. It's easy to be passionate about a place that you love and that you're fortunate enough to be in a leadership role. And as you know, I've been interviewing for a new job the last several months, but once you're a mayor, you're always a mayor, and you look at the problems and the challenges and the opportunities we have through that lens. I'm grateful for this recognition, and know that as I head into the State House in this new role, the work that we do is going to be in support of what's happening on the ground in our communities. I still firmly believe that local government is the branch of government we rely on the most. Educating our kids, keeping our neighborhoods safe, investing in those places you make memories, and driving economic prosperity. And particularly when it comes to gateway cities, these are the communities that were the regional hubs. I think about my own father who grew up in Lynn, who would say downtown on Union Street was teeming with people, shoppers. Lynn was the shoe capital of the world at that time. Salem had its prominence tied to the Great Age of Sail. Holyoke had their prominence tied to, the amazing paper industry that was there. Every gateway city has this story of prominence and wealth, of being a place that really mattered, and we still do. But we know we need some additional sort of connective tissue and assistance to shine these bones, to really make sure both the quality of life and the opportunities that exist in gateway cities are highlighted, supported, and partnered with at the state level. So I'm grateful for this recognition. Please know that I will always be thinking about the work that we're doing at the state level, how it impacts what's happening on the ground in our communities, and particularly our gateway cities. Those of us who are fortunate enough to lead, to be elected by our peers, to serve, have a responsibility, and looking forward to partnering up with the best teammate you could have in Maura Healey. Those of you who follow state government closely know that if you're the lieutenant governor, the one thing you really want is a superstar governor, and I feel like we really have that. So looking forward to the work ahead, grateful for the recognition, and I really want to thank MassINC. It was terrific looking at that video, Ben. It doesn't feel like it was 10 years ago, but all the data, the attention that's been paid to strategies, right? This wasn't just ideas that didn't lead to action to help support gateway cities is pretty impressive, and wouldn't be possible without MassINC and many of the folks who are on this Zoom call. So thanks so much for bringing us together. And our work is not done yet. I look forward to being in a position to help influence as we move forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mayor Driscoll. We look forward to a new generation of Gateway Cities policy with you. My name is Andre LaRue. I'm the Gateway Hubs Project Director at MassINC, and I will be giving a presentation about social infrastructure in gateway cities, which will hopefully lay the foundation for that next generation of policy that we're talking about. So my colleagues Sydney Koosters and Ben Foreman worked with me on this report, which will be available soon after today's event. And the origins of this work, which we've been working on now for about 18 months or so, originated early on in the pandemic. Now, obviously, many of our gateway cities suffered disproportionately from the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the big questions that my predecessor, Dr. Tracy Corley, started to ask at that time is, given this disproportionate impact, are the populations, our communities in gateway cities, do they have access to open space and the civic space that they need to be safe and healthy? Do our essential workers who live in gateway cities, can they access their jobs? With the shifting hybrid work population, would there be people moving to gateway cities so that they can live, work, and play in a smaller community, commuting less? And importantly, will our small businesses survive the pandemic, and what's the long-term impact on our gateway cities downtown? And there's a growing and well-established now body of research talking about the impact of isolation on our public health. And these facts right here are quite startling and even scary, and they predate the pandemic. And we know from anecdotally and our own experiences just how devastating the pandemic was in terms of exacerbating the social isolation. It's said that research has shown that premature death from all causes because of social isolation can elevate your risks on par with smoking, obesity, and physical inactivity. And our immigrant and LGBTQ populations are particularly susceptible to the social isolation. So we began to look at this concept of social infrastructure. And what does that mean? Because when we started, we really didn't know what it meant either. And this project has been a bit of an exploration to try to figure it out and create a methodology so that we can bring it in a practical way to our communities. So essentially, it's all the ways in which our built environment shape our social and community life. And there are a lot of examples of this social infrastructure, whether it's from your front stoop to playgrounds, to community rooms, to more formal living spaces and civic spaces, parks, and gathering areas. These are all aspects of social infrastructure. And because it's such a broad concept, it can be a little bit confusing, like, well, how do we get our hands around it? Does it just mean everything? It doesn't just mean everything, but what we're going to find is that how you use space is more important than the things themselves in that space, and I'll explain that a little bit more. And so when we started on this project, we were able to partner with Walk Boston, and we were able to get some support from the Solomon Foundation for Walk Boston's piece of it, as well as the Barr Foundation supporting MassINC's participating in this research project. And we basically started by saying, well, what do we know about social infrastructure? We know that density is important. We know that walkability is important. So let's start there. Let's start with what Walk Boston already does really well, which is walk audits. And that's examining the walkability of a particular place, engaging with the community in a process around that to get feedback about it. So we chose 5 downtown case studies: Springfield, Fitchburg, Brockton, Haverhill, and Fall River. And Walk Boston led a series of these over a year, essentially. Hybrid, a lot of it was digital, but the fact was we were all focused on the downtowns and asking this question: why don't more people walk in Gateway City downtowns? So here are some of the elements of the walk audit: roadways, intersections, sidewalks, streetscape elements, all part of what we were getting feedback on. We were able, as the pandemic progressed and the weather got better in 2021, to be able to do more in-person, small group pieces of the walk audit where we get to actually be there in person. But we also had virtual meetings as well, and people could do this walk audit individually. And we had a good, diverse set of stakeholders participating in each one. So back to the question of why don't more people walk? The walk audits, found a lot of things. We have a legacy infrastructure in our gateway cities that we just have not been able to keep up with over the years, and that really impacts our walking environment. So whether it's from the intersections and curbs of different materials that are kind of hodgepodge put together in terms of fixes, and even places as we see in the lower left-hand corner, like downtown Haverhill, where you have kind of an active streetscape, there's still a lot of conflicts at the pedestrian level, where you can see there with the pole in the middle, you have the seating outside, you have the parking. It's hard maybe for some folks to find those sidewalks accessible. So when we were thinking about, well, what can MassINC add to this analysis of walking infrastructure? We were thinking, well, what generates pedestrian trips and destinations? And in thinking about where social life was happening, the easiest thing to do was to say, well, where is it not happening? And so it's not happening in parked cars. So we looked at, did a parking analysis and land use analysis of the 5 downtowns. There's a lot of parking in our gateway city downtowns. And these obviously are supposed to be the areas that are most walkable in our communities. And we found between 29% and 38% of the entire downtown was taken up by parking. That's surface parking, some structured parking, but the developable land, about 1/3 of it is parking. And when you see it visually, it has an even more profound impact. So all of the yellow here, downtown Haverhill as an example, is parking. And to their credit, they're doing some projects over here in this area. They're going to be redeveloping it. This area has been redeveloped, so moving in the right direction. And don't mean to pick on any particular city here, because all of the downtowns were very similar in terms of their land use and parking. But you can see that it has a big impact on civic life. So when you have downtowns that are so car oriented, they're clearly not as walkable, and they're not as human oriented. If you add in the on-street parking in the streets, close to 50% of all of the land in downtown Haverhill, as an example, is dedicated to car infrastructure. Now, how does that affect the public space, right? And our experience of sidewalks and streets. So we developed a streetscape analysis where we categorized all of the street facades and edges in these downtowns And just to give an example, there's, we categorize them as active or inactive or limited activity. In the upper left, you can see a stretch where you might have a lot of activity, and things like frequent entrances and transparency, like windows into the buildings at the street level, and street furniture are all things that contribute to the pedestrian activity level of an area. Whereas down in the right-hand corner, you see that would be an inactive streetscape. You have a parking lot on the right, and it's not, doesn't necessarily feel a great place to walk. And this is how parking affects our streetscapes in general. You could have great activity on this side and on this side, and yet here in the middle, you really have a lot of streetscape around the parking lot that is not going to be generating any pedestrian activity, and usually not even kind of landscaped. There's not much engagement with the environment. So when we looked at the streetscape and did all this grading of these 5 downtowns, we found that well over half of all of the street edges in the downtowns were inactive or had very limited activity. And there are other dimensions to all of this pavement, right? The urban heat island effect. All of the downtowns were real nodes of heat in their surrounding areas. And that in part is related to the lack of tree cover that's in these areas. So we can see in Springfield here, you see less tree cover. This is a tool called Tree Equity Score, which you can look up any place in the country. Fantastic little tool, and it'll tell you how much tree cover you have and what you should have. So, for example, in Springfield, only 8% tree canopy cover in downtown. Really should be probably above 40%. And all of the downtowns of the gateway cities were very similar to that. We looked a little bit at regional mobility. So walkability, we felt, is the real foundation of mobility in the gateway cities. But we were also struck by the fact that there was virtually no bicycle infrastructure in any of the downtowns we looked at. In terms of public transportation, there are connections to the MBTA in most of the cities that we looked at with commuter rail, or could potentially have commuter rail. And then there's and they all have bus service, from the RTAs. And so what we have looked at is that none of the station areas are really thriving places, right? And they could be integrated into the downtowns much more. They could really become multimodal hubs. So how can we shift from this current car orientation to a much more multimodal orientation? In terms of civic spaces, we looked at what are the places in the downtowns that are anchors for civic life in these communities. And here in Fitchburg, Monument Park is a good example of that. It's right in the heart of downtown Fitchburg. If you can look around it, you have some institutional uses. You have a couple of churches. You have the district court. You have some offices over here. Across the street, you have the library. You have a restaurant. So it seems like it's the heart of the community and should function that way. But there's a couple of things going on here that we'd like to point out. One is that funding for public libraries has crashed over the last few decades, right? It's about 50% of what it used to be. And so a lot of libraries in gateway cities are struggling to stay open and have the kinds of hours that you might want for a real community serving institution. The churches, many churches are losing membership. And even when you have new churches sprouting up, as there are in many of these downtowns, there's a lot of storefront churches. Some of these churches are not very active either, and they're taking up what could potentially be active commercial spaces. So there's a couple of different dynamics going on with churches. And the park itself doesn't necessarily have a lot of activity right around. It's surrounded by the streets. You have to cross the street and go through one of the entrances to get in. So when we look at all of these activities around the Monument Park, we'll see that there's pretty much activity going on around it during the day. In the morning and lunchtime, you have a peak of activity. And then very quickly through the afternoon and into the evening, it dwindles down to almost nothing after 5 o'clock. And on the weekends, there's very little activity at all. And this is probably from some of the churches. So one thing that we want to point out is that if you're thinking about a downtown that's vibrant and active and attractive and walkable, you generally want it to have a 12 to 16 hour day, right, of activities. And what we're seeing is that at least in the areas around what should be our most important civic spaces, we're not getting that. We're getting maybe an 8-hour day, 5 days a week. The other thing that I would point out is that the diversity of uses around the places. A lot of our civic spaces in downtowns are, surrounded by institutions, which lends credence to the fact it's an important, significant space. But a lot of those institutions are not active around the clock 7 days a week. So we have to really be thinking about that. How can we build in new activities to these places? And then finally, historically, there was a lot of there's a reason for why a lot of our civic spaces in our downtowns look like formal parks. It's because we're a young country, we were a rural country for a long time. A lot of our central spaces started out as commons and common grazing areas, whereas in many other parts of the world, the civic spaces have been marketplaces. So this is an example here where in Mexico City, you have a largely hardscaped plaza surrounded by uses, by housing, by shops, by restaurants. And it's really the landscaping is a secondary feature of it. And there's actually quite a lot of trees in this plaza if you turn around, but you don't see that, you can still get the tree cover and the landscaping, but you also get the edges that are very active. But there are other spaces in our downtowns that really have potential for this kind of 12 to 16 hour activity. And here's an example from Brockton. So in Brockton, you have, again, you have like the Brockton Civic City Hall Plaza, which is hardscaped, but it doesn't have a lot of activity around it, mostly the City Hall. Whereas just a couple blocks away, you have this area called Legion Parkway, which is an area of small businesses, mixed uses. It's only 2 blocks, but you have 23 active entrances on that block. And there still could be more. There's 9 empty storefronts, there's 4 rows of parking. This is what it looked like back in the day. It still pretty much looks like this right now. You still have those 4 rows of parking in the middle. You have, a few trees, but again, these are, let me just talk about the treescape for one quick second. So, these are trees that have been planted. They need care to survive. Do they have adequate space? It's not clear. A lot of the parks and central spaces that we have in downtowns, as I mentioned, are these kind of passive green spaces that sometimes you wonder, like, what can you do in them? I think you'll probably hear from Heather later on about ways in which green spaces could become more active places. And when they have active activities inside them themselves, like playgrounds, like maybe food trucks at the edge, you can start to get a lot more social life within those types of civic spaces. But here you have an opportunity for maybe a more commercial oriented civic space where you're going to get a lot more of that organic activity that's contributed to by the private sector. And in particular, I also want to point out that you see a wide range of uses here. So there's residential uses, there's retail uses, there's offices, there is parking and vacant uses, but there's other stuff going on here too. There's like a little market, there's some restaurants, there's some services, there's a community health center. And so you see that there's more activity during the weekdays and even on the weekends. And there's a lot you can do to improve on that. And one of the ways that you can improve on that is by going to supporting inclusive entrepreneurship. So a lot of these spaces that are most active, we found, are the places that are serving the local population, and they're inexpensive commercial space, a lot of kind of mom and pop owned type of businesses, immigrant businesses, minority owned businesses. We did a report at MassINC this past year on inclusive entrepreneurship, a lot of great data and recommendations in there. So I direct you to that. I think there's going to be a link dropped into the chat by one of my colleagues. And one thing that we've noticed about these downtowns is, and something that requires some more follow-up research is how welcoming are the downtowns to the diverse communities that live in gateway cities today? And we suspect that they're not as welcoming as they could be. We've noticed that some of the most important clusters of minority-owned businesses are not in the downtown area. They're in other parts of the city. So one strategy that the municipal leadership could do to encourage more activity in the downtown would be to create a more welcoming permitting and marketing atmosphere to bring in those entrepreneurs so that they can help create the thriving types of places that you can really have in these downtowns. And we've seen that in cities like Lawrence, for a long time. There was a real kind of dichotomy between the Latino businesses on Broadway and the Anglo-owned businesses on Essex Street, which is the kind of the main street. And now over the last number of years, with I think more diverse administrations, you see a lot more Latino businesses on Essex Street, and as a result, that area has become a lot more diverse and vibrant. So, and when you do that, you can extend the day past the 8 hours. This is just a little comparison of activity between, the City Hall Plaza in Brockton, which is a little bit more of a formal space, and Legion Parkway, which is kind of a less regulated, less formal space with more kind of commerce going on. You can see that even there's just a lot more activities happening. And this brings us to our final kind of point that we started looking at, which is place governance. And this refers to the concept of the people, right? So we've been talking a lot about the built environment, but you need the software to go with the hardware. And place governance refers to this collaboration of stakeholders across sectors to make those decisions that shape the dynamics of places. So what exactly does that mean a little bit in more detail? It means cross-sector collaboration. It means developing a shared vision so that you understand when development happens. You're not just reacting to it, but you're seeking out development that carries forward the vision, the common vision. And that also means creating goals and mutual accountability, measuring your progress, and then doing some interim experimentation of placemaking and placekeeping strategies before you make those long-term investments in infrastructure. Save your millions of dollars, test these things out, focus on activities more than places and design, and then you'll be able to do the long-term investments when you're ready and when it's clear like how you can best support that. And one of the things that we at MassINC have been very focused on is district management tools. So we've seen in Massachusetts a more robust toolbox lately: business improvement districts, cultural districts, parking benefit districts. These can be layered onto each other. You also see more informal type leadership partnership, like the Lawrence partnership. There's the leadership cohorts that sort of evolved into leads up in the Merrimack Valley. There can be broad engagement in these types of tools. So we also need them to we need to create district management, which, because of the market dynamics and the property values of a lot of our downtowns, really needs state support as a partner in that district management to create more bids or other kinds of districts and sustain them. And it can't just be relying on that the commercial small property owners. But then we can also need to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible and figuring out ways that those other stakeholders can be represented in those bodies as well. So last slide here, we have a bunch of policy recommendations. There's 4 that I'm going to mention that are our principal ones. So one is infill development. There's a lot of parking. We really need to shift a lot of that surface parking in particular into activity so that we can rebuild our streetscapes, and we can take those small clusters of activity that are working around our main streets and downtowns and expand them. We need financing tools to be able to do that effectively, such as the Housing Development Incentive Program that a lot of you have been working on. Secondly, when we transition away from this car orientation, we need to do so incrementally. And one of the ways that we can do that is by consolidating parking into structured parking garages. Now, the state used to have programs to help communities pay for these expensive garages. We don't anymore. We need a program like that, particularly for gateway cities. And this is connected to an equity issue in a way you might not otherwise think about, but that electric vehicle infrastructure, research has been showing that there's a real disparity in terms of access to electric vehicles, despite the fact that people want them. And if we don't figure this out of where that EV infrastructure is going to go, then we're not going to have our urban populations have access to those kinds of vehicles which they need. And these types of structured, centralized garages could be a place for that to happen. Thirdly, place governance, I just mentioned. We really think that the online economy, particularly during the pandemic, which just exploded, is really undermining commerce on our main streets. And so it would make sense to us that a portion of that revenue that the state collects in digital or online sales taxes should be reinvested in our downtowns through support for district management, placemaking, and improvements to public space. And then finally, around public transit, it's important in order to become a truly multimodal community, we need to implement the MBTA's rail vision strategy. That means turning the commuter rail system into an electrified light rail system with more frequent service. And we got to get the fare policy right. So many people who live in gateway cities could benefit from that train service, but they just simply cannot pay for it. It's too expensive. So we need to have low-income fares on the commuter rail. We need to have fare-free programs for the RTAs. And I know our colleague Noah Berger is going to have something to say about that on the panel. Thank you. Let me turn it over to Ben.
Thank you for all that, Andre. You've given us a lot to talk over. I think one of the best innovations of the pandemic for us at MassINC is to have our innovators join us in panel discussion after our keynote. In the past, we used to just give our innovators an award and snap a picture. I don't think that really ever did justice to their insight and contribution. So we welcome them now to react to some of what you've shared with us and give us their thoughts, ideas, and perspective. I want to start by turning to our longest time colleague among the innovators on our panel, Marcus Marrero, who was the Planning and Economic Development Director for the City of Holyoke for a long time until he recently joined Mass Development to lead community development. So, Marcos, I'm not even going to go into your list of accomplishments. It's way too long, but I really do want to pick your brain here. We heard a lot about vacant spaces and how much of the land in our gateway cities is underutilized because of parking or vacant structures, or maybe structures that weren't built with an eye toward the streetscape and pedestrian activity. You've been trying to fill those holes for years and years. You know, I shudder to think what those maps would have looked like a decade ago, because we have made progress. So what are your thoughts in terms of the key strategies we can use to fill those holes? What's been most effective? What's lacking? How do we approach that part of the problem?
Sure, I appreciate the sentiment and the opportunity to add a couple of words here. You know, when I think of social infrastructure, and you know, Andrew did a great job at outlining the problems with the hardscape. But I think the most critical part here is if you think of this as the soil where we're doing our work, it's soil is inert by itself, right? And where we want to provide life in the cities, we have to see these as ecosystems. Now, I'll admit I'm a little lazy with my housework, so I have left conveniently all the leaves in fall just stay there. But I hear it's really good for the ecosystem of the soil and the trees, right? Because that'll allow all sorts of critters to do their magic and help things grow. And so I think everyone on this panel and that's being awarded, I think instinctively understands that it's that work with the people and programming in place to be able to, as Andre said, how you use the streetscape, how you use the lots and the vacancy to make things happen. So I think generally, and obviously I'll miss a whole bunch of stuff, and that's the grandiose thing of this panel. But there's smarter people than me here, but I think three key things are important in this realm. One is obviously site activation, and by that I mean different things. You have to have a pipeline for the types of businesses or industries that will align well with the vacancy that you have. I think we often dream of, oh, we're going to bring this like Amazon to the downtown, right? Like that clearly doesn't fit. Like, what is the pipeline of the small businesses that will occupy either those storefronts, those bigger, older office buildings, or those big mill buildings, right, that need all types of space and will want proximity to other businesses like them. Placemaking is a big deal because it can drive traffic into the downtowns. It could also get people activated. Andrew talked about like partnership work, and doing projects within our downtowns. It also gets a lot of buy-in and belonging from the community that is already there. And the third thing is reducing barriers to entry. Now that may be regulatorily, as in, and Patty may talk about this at some point, but whether it's like outdoor dining and regulations there in Fall River, or it's providing more co-working spaces so that entrepreneurs don't have to sign long-term leases with big deposits, or just looking at other areas in which the cost of entry into the marketplace is smaller. Second thing, stimulating demand, right? Our cities have a lot of value. I just don't think that people popularly recognize it. We tend to see more stuff talked about in terms of like crime and blight than we do about like, oh, Brockton is the best city to do this, or Lawrence is the best city to do this, or Springfield or Holyoke, right? Like, we need to recognize the value. We need to talk about it openly and target it to the folks who will demand the types of food that we have in our cities, the type of culture we have in our cities, the type of real estate we have, and the type of products that are being sold. Because those are the folks who will sign the leases. Those are the folks who will come in and shop and buy and have experiences in our cities. And will come and live in our cities or continue to live in our cities. There's a lot of folks who are there already. That leads me to the third point, which is start with local. We have to stop looking at our cities as deficit-based, right? There's a lot of people who want to be there, haven't always been given the opportunity. I think Andrew mentioned something along those lines as well. So how can we work with the local population that's there of business owners and residents who may not have had the opportunity to have businesses in the district, empower them to be a part of everything that's being built.
Thanks, Marco. I think all those remarks really represent the shift in thinking. 10 years ago, it seemed to me like we were thinking about what could you build in those spaces. And the businesses that were there at the time were sort of thought as marginal uses. And I think we did a report about 10 years ago on immigrant entrepreneurship, and it was really eye-opening to see how little infrastructure gateway cities had to support immigrant entrepreneurs. And I think that has changed fundamentally. We still probably have a long way to go, but a lot of cities are quickly making progress on that. And it speaks to those third spaces and how important they are for bringing people together in community. So I want to introduce Patty and Adelsa now, who are really our experts and leaders on those small storefront businesses and how we create dynamic commercial districts for them to thrive in. Patty, you're in Fall River with Viva Fall River. Adelsa, you're now down there on the south coast of New Bedford, but your experience in the pandemic was in the city of Brockton, working with the Brockton Redevelopment Authority. And that's where I want to start with the pickup on a conversation that we began really last year at this event was, why were so many people deciding to try and open a business in the midst of a pandemic? What was it like trying to support them? How did we build relationships with those business owners that we hadn't had before? So I want to come back to that and get your perspective of what's happening in communities today with those businesses. Now that the pandemic is, feels like it's behind us. Maybe we don't have as many resources as we had in the past, but do we still have the goodwill, the trust, and the relationships to work with them to grow those third spaces and those small businesses in our downtown? So do you want to start, Adelsa, a little bit kind of what you were going through in the pandemic and where things stand now in your perspective?
Sure, Van. I would say pivot in crisis by making fast and decisive adjustment to changing circumstances is part of basically our surviving skills as a human. And therefore, entrepreneurs did just what basically they just did that. They took advantage of the time and some cash that they have available, flexibility, and they did what entrepreneurs do the best. They basically took the risk with a strong desire to be successful. I would like to make reference for this conversation to a Forbes article date of March 2022 entitled COVID-19, 5 Lessons Learned on Small Business 2 years later. Two of them that stood up to me as relevant for this conversation was the number one, never underestimated the resiliency of small business and aspiring entrepreneurs. And that justify basically how, despite what we see in a lot of business closing the door, we did see business also that just was resilient and took advantage of the resources available, despite also the challenges to access to them, and they stayed open. And at the other end, we see the completely booming of new business, new entrepreneurs. At the same time, it's important also, and this is another point of this article, in terms of emphasizing the longstanding inequities that still exist and are made worse in a crisis. And that's to answer the second part of this conversation in terms of basically how this small business or the new entrepreneurs are surviving now. And basically what we see is the disparity in terms of Black-owned business, in terms of brown business, in terms of women-owned business, in accessing to resource, and the way also they were impacted by the COVID-19, by the pandemic. And this is where the problem still exists. How towns and cities are addressing these issues. So those small businesses are still there, and they are facing, the new ones are facing the same challenge that the other business, their existing business prior to them were facing. So the issues are still the same, even though we see the numbers. So they are trying to survive as well. So how we come with the programs and the towns and cities help address those issues in a more, just to kind of bring down or tackle the inequities that exist. That's a real issue for them.
Thank you, Delsa. And Patty, you're trying to build that sort of marketplace for them and support them and bring them customers and clients. Do you want to talk a little bit about your work and your perspective on these issues?
Sure, absolutely. I think, I hate to say anything that was as pervasive and really devastating as the pandemic had opportunities, but there are opportunities that exist everywhere. And that's kind of what we do in gateway cities. We find the opportunities and we try to, embolden people. And I think downtime, a lack of distraction, it afforded people with the opportunity to explore hobbies and talents and passions. And there was definitely an entrepreneurial passion, like a flame that was ignited, I think, here. I don't know of how many actual brick and mortars opened. I wouldn't say that was the case, but a lot of makers that we kind of discovered talent, and people discovered their talents, and we've kind of created an opportunity for people through the Fall River Farmers and Artisans Market, which is an outdoor marketplace that activates a public space that was previously underutilized. So in that way, we, created a safe, active space, by activating the space, it became safer. But we also provided this opportunity for people to come out and test the waters and see if what they were doing could become a business. Now, making isn't enough, though. There are people who want it to be more, and it's very scary to go from a craft fair or an outdoor marketplace to having your own business. And I think there needs to be other opportunities. There needs to be other steps. So we've kind of created this I don't like to call it a pipeline because it's with human beings, but there is like a stepped, like a way to go about it. So we have the Fall River Farmers and Artisans Market, but now we also take those same entrepreneurs and we give them an opportunity to have some space at a pop-up shop that we have in the heart of downtown Fall River. It's a retail incubator. And even that was affected by the pandemic. Before we were getting ready to, do a renovation, and we were going to have like one business come in, and we had this whole model set up, and that just kind of blew up when everything went down in March 2020. And it took us a while to get back to this place where we were like, okay, we did some research, we did a survey, and we realized that people were doing very specific things. They were making very specific things, but maybe not in the way that they were ready to have a big business on their own. So we have created this collective space where right now we have over 40 makers, local South Coast makers, not just Fall River, but because, we want to share the love. And we are doing really well. We've been open for 5 or 6 months now. And through that, we're trying to partner and find opportunities for people to get more information on how, they could perhaps, a lot of these people, this is their second job. So maybe we could connect them with resources to learn more, whether that be investment opportunities or just educational opportunities, with the hope that the next step will be filling some of the vacancies that we have downtown and in the city of Fall River. So it's providing that support through wherever people are. And I think, we've done a good job of sustaining that momentum. And I think that's where people are now coming out of the pandemic. Where are these opportunities to sustain this momentum that we've created?
Great. I want to travel up to the Merrimack Valley to introduce our last 2 awardees this year. Heather McMahon from Groundwork Lawrence and Noah Berger from the Merrimack Valley Transit Authority. Bring you guys into the conversation now, because if we want our downtowns to be vibrant places, they need to be spaces where people feel comfortable moving about and they have lots of different options, whether it's walking, biking, or taking public transit. And that's where you guys have put a lot of thought into how we improve our gateway city. So starting with Heather, that, the report talks a lot about green space in different forms of it, whether it's that square that Andre got into, or more of a linear park where people are crossing boundaries from one neighborhood to the next, maybe along a canal or an old rail line. This has been your life's work up in Lawrence with Groundwork Lawrence, thinking about how green space creates community. So do you want to jump in and sort of share your perspective about what's been accomplished really these last 10 years? We've had a lot of Gateway City Parks programs and investments, and people have done a lot of creative things. And what have we learned, and how do we build upon it?
Yes, happy to. And I think what's interesting, what's great is as this terminology and the work changes and adapts. So as the report says, we're talking about linear parks now. That's bigger than greenways and trails, right? Because it's not just about getting from point A to point B. It is about the connectivity. It's about regional connection. It's getting to not just jobs and schools and churches, but getting to your local park, getting downtown, getting the shops. So I think by talking about linear parks, we're really highlighting their value more than just place A to B. It also means you need less cars, right? Because you don't need your car to get from one place to another. You need less parking spaces, and you have more places. So when you come out, you get to sit at that bench under the trees. The Spickerville Greenway, which we would call a linear park, as it connects parks, but it also has an amphitheater where you can then go to our performance. There's public art along the rail trail in Haverhill. So there's lots of different ways to think about how do we really build these connections and bring people together who may not be. Just like Noah will probably talk about a bit on the bus as well. And we're working together to really see how does our work overlap to make this active transportation and more equitable transportation work for everyone. And I'd also say, though, we've been talking a lot about equitable development, but it's also about health, which we've alluded to some as well. We have funding as we're coming into the winter season for heating. We don't have funding for residents who are struggling for cooling. And even though it's really hot outside, and that's why we need these trees, it actually could be hotter inside. And then with outdated housing stock, with outdated electricity systems, that's when we have fire. So all this really comes together about how do we really look at the health and the equitable development for the whole community and give access to that. And knowing that being outside on these linear parks in the shade of a tree may also mean the air quality is better there than it could be inside in the housing. So it's really, I think another thing we need to think about though, you made a great point, Marcos, about assets, is our cities were built to be this way for social connections, for connections to work, to school, to services, the health. We have to go back to that. And we also have to make sure we do it in a way. I know there was a comment about residents not being happy about parking garages at night. Well, the more people we have out on our linear parks, the safer people feel, the more likely they will leave their cars someplace else and walk. And how great is it to go to a restaurant and then maybe go buy that dessert someplace else or meet a friend with a coffee, or just hang out outside after church. And then the last point I'd really like to make is we talk about the libraries and the cut in funding. Well, that's hitting our cities in many ways, including our parks departments, if there is one, our DPW. So as we talk about increasing funding around gateway cities, greening the gateway cities park, how are we also ensuring that our cities can afford this infrastructure to maintain it? Because it doesn't make sense to keep redoing it if we can't invest. And those private-public partnerships really need to not just be businesses and government, but the nonprofit sector and residents. How do we make it easier for everyone to come together to take care of these assets and keep building on them and build connectivities between our communities?
Well, thanks for all that, Heather. That's lots to think about. I'm going to turn to Noah now. And fairly soon I want to open it up to you all to join in the conversation. So feel free to throw questions in the chat, and I'll be sure to put them before our panelists. But Noah, every single MassINC report, I think over the last 10 years has called for increases in RTA service and improvements in transit, appreciating that if we're going to really get more density, more urban activity in our gateway city downtowns, we're going to need to have public transit to get people around, or otherwise the congestion will just become unbearable. So this report is a different take on that. It talks about public transit as really a democratizing institution, one of the few spaces where people come together from all walks of life and interact. It calls for us thinking about the design and operation of public transit that way. You're certainly one of the most innovative transit leaders in the Commonwealth. I think everybody knows well your work to do fare free and increase ridership in Lawrence, and the bravery that took. So I'm sure you've thought about this issue many times over. Can you share with us your ideas and vision for what transit can be in our gateway city communities?
No, absolutely. And thanks, Ben, and thanks to everyone. Thanks for calling attention to this. I think that's I love the highlighting social infrastructure, because I think public transportation is key to that in layered ways. I think there are at least three important ways that we both contribute to and are a part of the social infrastructure. So maybe I'll outline those three first. But the first is the way I think is that people often realize, even if they don't do anything about it, is that we are a tool to support all the other sort of placemaking and economic activity and social activity in our communities. So we bring people to jobs, to the parks, to the businesses, to the downtowns, to the recreational spaces. So I think that's always often understood and highlighted in these types of reports. I think we also actually are part of the built environment, and sometimes that's less appreciated. We are, and I love the way you characterize it as a space where everyone in the community comes together. I think one thing that's often overlooked is that our vehicles are actually a nexus for this. When I first started in this position now over a year ago, one of the things, I dragged my team out to meet with community groups, and we went to met with all sorts of folks in Lawrence and Haverhill and Methuen, as well as I think, Amesbury is kind of an honorary gateway city. And just, said, what's the role that we play for you and folks you represent? And way too often the response was, I have no idea. Honestly, you guys are irrelevant to us. And we, that made it very clear we were not present in the community. We were kind of an afterthought. And we can't be the tool that I talked about earlier if we're just we blend into the woodwork. So we started making some changes. We've already talked about going fare free. That was an important decision that we're able to justify from a fiscal perspective so that the board would go along with it, but as well as the economic reasons. But what it did is it took down one of the barriers that people had for getting on our buses. It was, and not just the financial barriers, but just the intimidation factor. So, in travel training, which is something that we do, at least half of it was spent on how you pay the fare. So that was immediately eliminated. One interesting sort of side effect of that is it also it made the relationship between passengers and drivers much more amicable. In the past, drivers had the heavy burden of having to police a fare policy, and that was no longer the case. And by the way, we didn't just eliminate fares, we physically removed the fare boxes. So that had a physical component to it that really sent a message. So oftentimes you hear about transit authorities going fare free, but they leave the fare boxes up. So this was just taking that extra step. We also were able to, so while other transit authorities and frankly us too, were underwater in terms of just being able to recruit the drivers and retain the drivers, that's something that we worked on that we were able to change, and I'll get into that as in the third discussion. But that allowed us, we actually reversed that and we're able to grow our driver workforce. That allowed us to actually double frequencies for our Lawrence-based routes this past September. So that's on the service side. These are some of the things that we had to get right. But then we also looked at what does the actual physical bus look like. And so for those of you in the Merrimack Valley have seen that we went from buses that had the exact same paint scheme as a mail truck, which is not always a welcoming part of our communities, to a bright, bold with it's coral, it's aqua, it's yellow, it's fun, it's happy, it stands out, and that's much more inviting. And we said, it's not just about prettying up the buses, but we had to get some of the infrastructure stuff right first. But with that, that's also something that now transit is not viewed as a drudgery, but is something that it's exciting that people want to be a part of. And we took input from the community that helped shape what the buses look like. So for one, the color scheme actually came from so the color of housing in Old San Juan in Puerto Rico, and that was something that the community said that's something that was inviting and happy. We also included a tagline at the top of the vehicles. It says "Let's go," and it also says "Vamos." And as transit providers, we've gotten very good at translating into Spanish what you can't do. Don't stand in front of the yellow line. Don't talk to the bus driver while the vehicle's in motion. No eating, no drinking, no radio playing. But this is the first time that we actually that there was an affirmative statement in Spanish. And our largest city, Lawrence, is 83% Spanish speaking. Our ridership is majority Spanish speaking. So we're actually showing that we're welcoming to our riders. We're encouraging people who happen to speak Spanish to ride our vehicles. We also heard from the disability community that people with disabilities have places to go too. And so if you look at the accessibility icon on our buses, it's a dynamic forward moving symbol. It's not the traditional static symbol. So little subtle hints like that of that everyone is welcome has already played a tremendous dividend. And by the way, since going fare free, we've more than doubled our ridership, and we have now exceeded our pre-pandemic levels for the first time. So I think that bodes well. The third aspect that I think often goes underappreciated for the role we play in social infrastructure is we're also a major employer, and we employ people who come from our community. You can't outsource driving a bus. That's got to come from the Merrimack Valley. So we worked hard not to take our workforce for granted. And I mentioned earlier how the entire country is undergoing a driver shortage, and we recognize that. First of all, we looked closely at the market and realized that it's very typical that you negotiate a hard bargain with your bargaining unit and then congratulate ourselves to saying, hey, we held salaries low. And we were no exception to that. And the problem is we priced ourselves out of the market. So we were able to change that. And so we, by the way, if anyone here is interested in driving a bus, a great job. You're in a corner office. You get to interact with your community. We're at almost $28 an hour. So welcome. And I think also we also offer a training opportunity that even if you don't have a CDL, you can come start on our paratransit side, which drives vans which don't require a CDL, and we will train you to get your CDL. So that's part of the training that we can help to lift the community up. I've heard it said that the CDL is the new PhD, and so that's another benefit to coming over here too. We also looked at the little things. We added.
No, let me stop you there. You've given us three really great things to think about.
Yeah.
In a taste for the innovation and the way you guys are doing it, and back to our point about the greatest things happening in Massachusetts are happening in the gateway cities, and we ought to pay more attention. So thank you. I just want to get to a couple of the audience questions before we unfortunately have to close for the day. And Mary Waldron, I had a really good one about the business improvement districts in gateway cities where you have a lot of nonprofit taking up real estate. A bid district might not work so well if they're not paying into it. They might not be accustomed to paying property taxes and don't want to start that with a bid district where it requires them to pay into it. And we definitely understand that has been a historical challenge that many cities have faced when they're trying to build these. Our hope, I think, is that with a strong state match, district management legislation would make it much more enticing for people to reach into their pockets and do their part. But that may be my naive perspective. You guys have been in this work. Any thoughts, Marcos or others, on how we make those types of district management entities effective in the gateway city context?
Sure. I think there are three ways in which money can be highly effective, and again, not the only three that immediately come to mind. I would summarize them as small, social, and unsafe. So small in the sense that it doesn't really require, in fact, sometimes it's counterintuitive that if the funding opportunity, and I don't mean the pot of money, I mean the funding opportunity to the entity is really big. It doesn't take a dramatic amount of money to seed important work. It's less than 100,000, sometimes dramatically less than that. Could be less than 50,000 on some occasions. For site activation, startup costs, basic equipment, filling the gaps of the imagination, right? Soft costs for planning, and making sure that people have buy-in, see the pictures, see the plan, and have a short-term activation project. Those are huge wins. Social in the sense that it can't just be having transactions with people on the ground. I think all of us on this, not just on the panel, but in the audience, have been involved in some way in this collaborative work in gateway cities. And it has a longer sticking effect if we're not just doing our own personal agenda for our institutions, but we're tackling common problems that we see on the ground, and we're solving multiple problems at the same time. And then by unsafe, I mean, we have to get really accustomed to failing every now and then. And I think writ large everywhere, government is very hesitant for real and valid reasons, right? Like if you fail, then, you know, the political cycle hits you back and all that type of thing. But if you fail small, you can, that's less of a problem. But here's the thing, even if you succeed half the time, and I think most of the time, these small projects succeed in some way because you're trying to solve 10 problems and you solve 7. The accumulation of those will far outstrip A, doing nothing, and B, the failures. So like having unsecuritized money, if it's loans, or basically having smaller grants, I think goes a long way.
And Ben, I'll jump.
Oops. I'm just going a little bit off the topic and take advantage that Mary Waldron from Brockton and great cheerleader for Brockton is here, just to say something on support small business that I feel that I will do a disservice to Brockton to not mention that. 3 recipes that work great for Brockton, that is nurturing, empowering, and celebrating small business. And I want to say how the city of Brockton understood the assignment, and the Brockton Redevelopment Authority hire a business assistance person that it's actually the business assistance program. And the reason that I'm here today, that basically did this job in terms of foster small business by recognizing the diversity and the business that exists in the city and recognizing them as the backbone of the economic development, empowering them by supporting grassroots organizations like Greater Brockton Minority-Owned Business Association, created under the Small Business Association, Small Business Administration pilot program for community development, and where Brockton Redevelopment Authority is one of the spokes, and also by celebrating, and I want to emphasize the celebrating the woman-owned business celebration event that happened in Brockton that is becoming now an annual event, how that can help celebrate the vibrancy and give business the motivation and feeling that they are part of their community. I just felt that it's something that I have to mention, and I don't want to take much of the time, allowing you to answer more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Adelsa. Before we go to Heather on this, Patty, I know you've been working and looking at sort of business improvement district structures for Fall River. Do you want to add anything to what would make it viable for your community?
I mean, I definitely think, having the support of, the municipal leaders is really, really important, and definitely key property owners that can champion the cause. Like you definitely need people who can, from all aspects of the downtown life, from residents to small business owners to nonprofit organizations, but having those, it's the messaging. It's like, how do we find out what people need, and how do we, the services are obviously, everybody agrees on them and whatnot, but like the messaging is really how we're going to get people, to buy into this idea. And I think, I wanted to make a comment about what Marcos had said about, the small wins, and you're trying to do so many things. But I will have to say, as somebody who has, definitely had little tiny failures at different points in this process, I've learned some of the most valuable lessons from those. And I'm glad that that these, mass development and the Transformative Development Initiative has allowed and empowered an organization like Viva to take those chances and to not be afraid to do it, and get these bigger learnings that we would never get just by like having a conversation and getting around a table and discussing it and doing a feasibility study. All of those things are great, but the needs are immediate, and we need to, and that's why a business improvement district is so important, because it can more nimbly meet those needs, and the needs are great, and the needs are always changing as well. So that's my messaging to people here, is like, if you want action, this is the way to get it.
Thank you, Patty. With this last minute that we have left, I just want to ask, there was a really important question about the Fair Share Amendment and its revenue for transportation, and how Gateway Cities should think about making sure they get their fair share of the Fair Share Amendment. Obviously the needs of RTAs are great. The need to improve the MBTA commuter rail infrastructure and implement that regional rail vision is important, changing those fare structures. And then we hear from municipal leaders endlessly about Chapter 90. and just maintaining roads and sidewalks. So I know Noah and Heather, you both think about these kind of infrastructure mobility needs. What are your thoughts about how we kind of organize the Gateway City Ask on the fair share amendment transportation portion?
No, and absolutely, and that's a great point, Ben, because I think every transit provider in the Commonwealth and probably in the country is looking at a situation where we're going to need significantly more resources in 1.5 to 2 years. And we've been level funded by the Commonwealth again this year as all the RTAs. And I think the argument to that, I mean, first of all, I think and our team has made the decision that the best way to make that case is to put the best possible service we can put on the road right now using the resources that we do have.
Got it.
And I think that's so that's why we're trying to get the in addition to putting more service on the road, we're trying to optimize our service. So clean up all the routes that tended to go like this and really respect the time of our riders, which maybe we haven't done so well in the past. We literally had routes that were doing figure eights and were not, the inbound was completely different from the outbound, so you couldn't really get back to where you started. So I think that's part of the ask. I think in our case we have three gateway cities in our service district. So that makes the case, and I think it bodes well for the future that public transportation was part of what folks were advocating for when they pushed for the fair share amendment. So I think we need to keep reminding people of that and look for resources and talk about how we are part of that social infrastructure that you guys do such a great job.
Got it. Thank you, Noah. And Heather, you get the last word here quickly.
And I think to Noah's point, we're working together, groundwork in the MVRTA, not just in our spheres, but how does it work together? There's an amazing triangle that's a brownfield that's the community is asking, and it's becoming a park. And we're really looking at that connectivity and how do we do that? And it can't just be gateway city by gateway city, right? We work across these borders. Our neighborhoods don't end at a municipal line. So we've really got to think through how can we equitably make sure that folks can get to, because you might live in one city and work in another, right? And so our linear parks, our public transportation, all this needs to be looked at on a regional basis and to support that and not just have it be competitive.
Thank you, Heather. We really appreciate that. And on that note, I want to thank you all for your leadership and your service to the Gateway City communities, and hope you will remain with us in this Gateway Cities movement going forward. And with that, I want to go back to the South Coast to another one of those indelible images you saw throughout the 10-year Gateway City anniversary celebration video. The co-chair and founder of the Gateway City Caucus, our strong and committed partner, Representative Antonio Cabral. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon at this point, right? I was listening to the conversation and the discussion, and I can't wait for the next session. I think we have so many good things to work on with you, MassINC, and other partners when it comes to Gateway Cities. So we do need to pick a new co-chair for the Senate, on the Senate side, but we'll get to that at some point soon. I'm supposed to do an introduction, right? Am I?
Yeah. It's always good to have a former Gateway City champion introduce our latest Gateway City champion.
Okay, so are we ready for that, right? So good afternoon. Thank you to my friends at MassINC, especially Ben and Andre, for inviting me to join you all this morning or this afternoon as well. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing my longtime friend, Senator Eric Lesser, this year's Gateway Cities Champion Award winner. As my co-chair of the Gateway Cities Legislative Caucus, I know firsthand how much Senator Lesser has fought for Gateway Cities in our regional economies. It's been a true partner. He's been a true partner, creative problem solver, and a fierce advocate for such issues as HDIP, neighborhood stabilization, and equitable entrepreneurship. Most importantly, he's fought to ensure that cities like ours, outside of 128 and outside of 495 in some cases, get the attention and investment they deserve. All of our gateway cities are stronger because of Senator Lesser's work. His departure from the legislature is a real loss for us, but his impact and his legacy ensures that the Gateway Cities Legislative Caucus is a force on Beacon Hill. Senator Lesser is a visionary leader who has committed himself to empowering gateway cities through public policy, and over the course of his career in the legislature, he has improved the lives of many throughout the Commonwealth. It is my honor to introduce him here today. Congratulations, Senator Lesser.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair Cabral. It's really been an honor. It's been a lot of fun, frankly, to work on the Gateway Cities Caucus with you. We've gotten a lot done together. So many meetings, both in person at the State House and of course on Zoom, but you've been a great partner and a friend to me. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for the really generous introduction. I know we're coming close to time here. I have my great plaque that came in the mail, and I really just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to MassINC, who has just been an incredible partner. Congratulations to Joe. Really excited for you, Joe, and all the great work you're going to do. And I really want to give a very special thank you to Ben Foreman, who's been a great partner for so many years on a lot of different issues that we've worked on together, and of course also to Andre. You guys have both been great to work with. Joe, I've worked with quite a lot in his other roles, and I'm excited and jealous actually that the next Gateway Cities chair will get to work with him at MassINC, along with Chair Cabral. Has really just been great. And I also want to really thank our colleagues in the Gateway Cities Caucus. We have an incredible group of state representatives and state senators from every corner of Massachusetts, because gateway cities are in every corner of Massachusetts, who step up every budget, every economic development bill, every bond package, every supplemental budget to make sure that our communities and especially our most vulnerable communities are protected and are invested in. And I just also want to give a really special thank you to my staff. Many of you work closely with Liz Storms, who is our legislative director, Molly Trowbridge, who's on the call, our communications director, who staffed so many of the caucus meetings, and of course, our chief of staff and general counsel, Stephanie Swanson, who was in the middle of HDIP and so much else. We will get HDIP done. That's one big piece of unfinished business, but we are going to get that done in the new session. I will be rooting for it as a private citizen from the sidelines. But most importantly, I really want to thank the constituents of the first Hamden and Hampshire district, especially my constituents in Springfield and Chicopee, who gave me the opportunity to work with all of you and to speak for those two incredible gateway cities at the State House. There's so much great work going on. I was following along to my neighbor Marcos in Holyoke and all the incredible work he's doing, and now what he's doing at Mass Development. So just really wanted to say thank you. And I'm only a minute over, so I'll wrap there and just say I'm looking forward to continuing to work with everyone. I'm not going away. I'm not moving. Just will be doing work in a different capacity from here on out. And just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We really appreciate you.
Congratulations, Senator Lesser, and also to Mayor Driscoll and to all of our honorees this year. What a fantastic event, and I hope we all leave here today resolved and re-energized to continue this important work of fostering vibrant communities in our gateway cities. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, but please don't leave quite yet. Thanks to our sponsors, awardees, honorees, and speakers. As we mentioned earlier, all of the materials and recording of this webinar will be made available. And please follow us on social media, subscribe to the Gateway Cities Journal, our bi-weekly newsletter. And before we close, just a few more minutes of your time. It's a really exciting moment for MassINC. I'm sure that many of you saw the announcement we made last week that Joe Kreisberg will be joining us as CEO in January. Joe is currently the president and CEO of the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations, and I'm sure that he's been a longtime partner to many of you. We are thrilled to bring Joe aboard and to usher in a productive new chapter at MassINC next year. So we wanted to give Joe the last word, and Joe, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Maeve, and thank you, everyone. What a terrific panel, what a terrific discussion. Congratulations, Senator Lesser. Congratulations, Lieutenant Governor-elect Driscoll, and all the honorees. People ask why I'm making a move. This is why I'm making a move, because I'm so excited to get to work with all of you in this new role on this really important agenda. I have a lot more to say, but I don't have a lot more time to say it right now. But starting in mid-January, I'll have plenty of opportunity to talk with all of you, to work with you. Please reach out with your ideas and suggestions, and I can't wait to get to work. So great job by the team today from MassINC. What a really professional job on running this panel and discussion and forum, and I look forward to many more. So thank you and have a great day.